You ever walk into a hard pad session or sparring and your body just isn't there? You're stiff, you're tired, and you're still sore from lifting 2 days ago. Well, that isn't strength, that's interference. Welcome to the Black Line Blueprint, the podcast that cuts through the noise and helps fighters train smart, recover better, and show up strong both physically and mentally. I'm Coach Frederick, and today we're digging into a problem that too many fighters face. Their strength and conditioning work is hurting their fight work. You train to fight, not to be the strongest or most enduring person in the room. If your gym sessions leave you beat down instead of built up, if you're taking away from your ability to strike, grapple, or move with intent, then it's stealing from your performance, not adding to it. Today, we're going to talk about how we can flip that. As always, I'll be looking at my notes here in front of me. If you are watching this, you'll see me looking down. If you are listening, there may be some pauses in between as I'm collecting my thoughts, but I'm just making sure that I do not ramble, which I still may ramble, but I want to stay on task and make sure I give you the best possible quality as much as possible. So let's dive into the main portion here. So strength and conditioning is a tool to support your performance. Your strength and conditioning is not your sport. All that simply means is you're not chasing numbers in your strength conditioning session. That can be a fun thing to add in from time to time, but if it takes over your strength conditioning sessions, then you're doing it wrong. If you're doing that and it's stealing from your energy that you should have for your sport-specific skill work, then you're doing it wrong. But if from time to time you chase a heavier load lifted than you did the last time, you want to lift, you want to have a heavier 8-rep max trap bar deadlift than you did the last session, that's perfectly fine. And that's what we want. We want progress in those lifts, but we don't want that to be the end goal. Remember, the goal isn't to win in the gym. The goal is to show up better to your sport-specific skill sessions. My theory and my philosophy with coaching is you should leave your strength and conditioning sessions feeling built, not broken. You should feel fresh, not crazy fresh, but more resilient as well, meaning you're able to handle the stress load of your sport-specific work better. You're not as beat down from that training because your strength and conditioning work is building up your resilience. And you should be more confident in your body. You're not dragging through the rest of the week and hoping that your body just lasts and holds up for the rest of the week until you get to that off day. And for you fighters who do train almost 7 days a week, you really have to dial this in, and you cannot have your strength and conditioning work interfering with your sport-specific skill work. So you have to dial this in. And some people go on the opposite end and they just don't do it at all. And that's not the approach either. So fight training is always priority number one. Everything else needs to be programmed around that. So the common problems that I see with fighters is they get into their sport-specific skill work, and now for some apparent reason they complain like, hey, my punches aren't as snappy, for instance, or clean as they should be. I don't feel like I have enough power, or my grip always tends to just like fatigue out on me. My legs just get fatigued during certain grappling exchanges and stuff like that. And with those scenarios, I'll ask, what else are you doing? I'm doing road work just every day of the week. Oh, really? Like, how many miles are you running? Oh, about maybe 3 to 5 miles each day. And I mean, I'm laughing, but it's a thing that I commonly hear, just like doing way too much conditioning work or just killing themselves in the gym doing a ton of volume in each training session, or just ego lifting and also lifting their frustration away from the stress of day-to-day life. That's another big thing. I've been there before, and I've known so many people to do that. But here's the thing. when you reflect back, you have to think about, like, is this really affecting my sport specific skill work, and how can I make the adjustment to not have it interfere with that? And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But another common mistake is treating lifting like bodybuilding or powerlifting with no carryover to fighting. What I mean by this is not mean I don't mean being sport specific with the little quotes here, um, but sport specific in a way that complements your sport. So instead of doing a ton of bilateral exercises, such as having both feet on the ground doing barbell back squats, maybe we do more single leg movements, such as dumbbell split squats or even barbell split squats. So that kind of translates over to the sport more effectively than the barbell back squat would. It trains your range of motion that you might have or you might be exposed to during your sport. It trains that single leg strength and balance that you might see more often in your sport. You're getting more qualities that would carry over into your sport than just the strength increase. So the qualities transfer over more effectively with these specific movements, let's call them the sport specific movements, than training like a bodybuilder and just trying to do leg extensions and getting your legs as big as possible, or doing a ton of volume and be like, oh, I'm not going to be, outworked, and just treating it like just, once again, bodybuilding. And this is education right now. Like, I'm educating on for people because I've had fighters come to me and just like, I was just lifting like I lifted before I started fighting. And that's okay, but now you know that you need to do something different, and I'll be teaching you how to do it more effectively. So doing more single arm, single leg movements, movements that are less fatiguing on your body. So not having the barbell stacked over your spinal column, which can fatigue out your system a little bit faster, or pulling deadlifts off of the ground. Maybe you're shortening up that range of motion. So doing movements that have a little less fatigue carryover, so that way you can still be fresh for your sport-specific skill work. That's how we would make that adjustment for that one. Another common mistake I see is just testing maxes or doing high volume circuits or chasing soreness right before or even after sport-specific skill sessions. So doing them before can definitely increase your risk for injury during that session. Now, I do have a training session where I have my fighters, they're doing their strength work and their strength condition work before they go into their sport-specific skill work, their MMA. But we are just doing a walkthrough. So it's more like an activation. So we're doing a walkthrough with me because it's the best time for them to actually get direct coaching from me. So when they do their other strength and conditioning session, they know exactly what they need to do in that session. So the walkthrough is still effective because they're getting a stimulus, they're getting activation for their sport-specific skill work, but they're not overdoing it. And that's something I have to stay on top of as a coach and make sure they're not pushing their body too much beforehand. And if they are, we just move it to a different session. But ideally, you'll want to keep that session at least, depending on the person, but a good rule of thumb is keeping it at least an hour away from your sport-specific skill session. So if that's an hour between before or an hour between afterwards. And then if you're doing it after your sport-specific skill work, you may not get the best benefit out of that strength and conditioning session. So in between time, maybe you want to make sure you get your energy back up. So hydrate, get your nutrients in your body, and then go and do your sport-specific or your strength and conditioning session. Another common problem that we see is forgetting to adjust training for fight camp versus off camp. So still doing the high volume. And honestly, I've seen people do even more work with their strength and conditioning during camp when they're already ramped up with volume in camp. This isn't the time to peak that. That should have already been peaked earlier on. All that's going to do is just take away from your peak potential there. It's going to fatigue out your body and your system. It dampens you. We call it like dampening. So basically, let's just say if your highest power output for your legs on the bike was 100 watts or something like that. I'm just throwing out a random number, but let's just say your peak power was 100. When you dampen yourself, the peak power your body's going to be able to output is 80%. So when you do a ton of, let's say, maybe work that blows up your legs or a ton of work that blows up your arms, that's work that's fatiguing your body and not allowing you to be peaked and fresh for power expression, best strength expression, recoverability. I have experienced that in the CrossFit realm because I trained CrossFit athletes. I was involved in CrossFit before too. And one of the things that we would do when it would come to the CrossFit Open would be for movements, we would prep them in that system. And that was dampening them so they didn't fatigue out as much because they didn't need to be super powerful or super strong or whatnot and quick. For that, they needed to be enduring and being able to put up with a lot of muscle fatigue buildup and muscles being blown up. But for fighters, one of the things, speed kills, right? In sports and athletics, being explosive and being powerful, that kills in this specific sport, and being able to outlast your opponent. One of the things I say about this, and I won't dive too deep into it, but it's just that think about you can be more enduring in a way that you may not think you can be more enduring. So, for instance, if you increase your power, let's just say your punching power by 30% than it was beforehand. And that's just throwing a random number out there. Then when you're fatigued, and let's just say you drop down to 15%, you're still more powerful than you were before. So you can say that you got more enduring, but in general, you're just more powerful. And even at a fatigued level, you're still more powerful. So you got to think about it in that sense, or at least that's the way I think about it. And that's the way I train my athletes. I don't chase endurance for the sake of endurance. I chase certain performance metrics that we can say, hey, if we increase this baseline, then even when you are fatigued, you can still put out great performances in this characteristic with strength, with power, with speed. So, and then off camp. Yeah, during off camp, the volume is higher and we are, putting in a lot more work, but at the same time, we're still doing it with intent. So if you're off camp and you're putting in a lot of volume and trying to reduce mobility limitations, you're, building up muscle endurance and stuff like that, you still want to make sure it doesn't interfere with sport-specific skill training, and then also make an adjustment once you are in camp. And sometimes fights come up really quickly, so you have to know that you need to make an adjustment there. Next thing is treating the gym like the main performance arena instead of a support system. So chasing performance numbers in the gym to keep it as simple as possible. So remember, it's just like you're doing this to have carryover to make you more resilient, to build your athletic base potential, so more strength, more power, the potential to express more power in your sport, better movement efficiency, better range of motion and strength in those ranges of motion. That's what we're chasing when we're doing our strength and conditioning work, not specific numbers for our strength and conditioning work. That's for the coach to look at and, track, are we making improvements over time? Not for you to just, be excited about. Now, if we're way far away from a fight and you're not fighting as often, of course, that's something that can keep you motivated. But at the same time, you got to make sure that it's still not interfering with your sport-specific skill work. So getting into some of the ways that I coach, and I've already explained some of these things too, is that when I write programs, I base them around my fighters' fight priorities, not, an ego thing. So even though I know they want to be bigger, or they want to be able to feel like they're strong with this bench press or a back squat or something like that, it's just like, no, sir. Or no, ma'am, we're not doing those exercises at this moment. And this is the reason why we're not doing those exercises, because you may have this imbalance that if you do this exercise, it's just going to leave you more achy for your sport specific skill work. And then once you do that, now you're even achy-er for the next time you come into your strength conditioning session. So we have a purpose behind it. It's about the priorities that we want to, if they have a movement imbalance, if they have, let's just say they need to improve their mobility of their hips, right? Back squats, okay, yeah, we can get to mobility improvements with them, but we'll probably be better off if we're doing more single leg movements and building mobility and strength in those movements. So I always make sure that the program is based on what priorities that we're trying to tackle, and not just to, fill their egos or whatnot. And in fight camp, like I mentioned earlier, the biggest thing that I emphasize is lower volume overall. So because the volume is a little bit higher, they're sparring a little bit more, they're going really hard, and we lower the volume in their strength and conditioning work so they can be fresh for that. They're still pushing the movements if they feel good, but the volume is lower overall, so that way they can stay fresh for everything else. And we're adapting to the volume that we put in that they're putting in their camp. And we keep it simple. So that's it's going to get into that in another episode. But the exercises, the selection is all simple movements that they can execute without having to think too much about it. That is the key thing. You are not going to get the best that you can out of a specific exercise if you cannot execute it effectively. So if you see an exercise on social media and it's just like, oh man, that looks really cool. Oh, he moved really fast through that movement. Maybe I should do that to get faster. Probably not. Especially if you tried it, I don't know, 3, 5, 6, 7 times and you got instruction on it and it was still hard for you to perform. You're probably best suited doing something simple that you can execute that still gives you the same performance outcome that you're looking for, because it's not specifically the exercise, it's the performance metric that we're trying to increase. So you can do box jumps and increase your hip explosiveness. You can do broad jumps and improve your hip explosiveness, or seated box jumps and improve that same characteristic. But which one is going to be more appropriate for you? Or you can do a combo move. You can do a seated box jump into a depth jump, right? So you can do combination movements, but do you need that specific combination movement? Is that going to be effective for you? Do you have certain limitations that now, because your ankle mobility isn't as great, now we're potentially leading you to risk overuse injuries because we didn't take into account your ankle mobility? So we just keep it simple. I told you I can go and I can rant from time to time, but we just keep it simple so that way they don't have to think too much, and that they can keep the focus, or the main thing. They can focus on their skill work and everything that they need to develop in there and just execute the exercises and get the most out of them. Outside of camp, we push, but always in a way that complements their skill work. So I make sure outside of camp, we still, in camp as well, we still push the exercises. Every day we're trying to push that exercise to its limit. So reps in reserve may be 0 to 2 on a day-to-day basis. So if, for instance, if they're doing a lift, let's say trap bar deadlift, they should be able to do, and they're shooting for 8 reps. They should be able to do that movement with the ability to do 10 reps, right? Or they should be able to only be able to get 8 repetitions if we going from 0 to 2. So if they felt like they can do 5 more reps, they need to increase the weight. If they felt like they can do 3 more reps, they need to increase the weight. If they felt like they can do 2 more reps and they're feeling good that day, they need to increase the weight as they continue to work through that exercise. That's what I mean by pushing it, not like grinding and straining through repetitions, but pushing it and still moving fast and with intent with those movements. And that's another thing about sports specific, right? We still want to be fast with our heavy lifts as much as possible, or at least the intent to move the weight fast. So I always remind my athletes that strength and conditioning should support sport specific skill sessions, not take away from it. So I had a fighter who was lifting 6 days per week, basically, on top of their sport specific skill work. But when it was time for their skill work, they were sore, fatigued, grip was shot, shoulders tired out quickly, and they just couldn't keep up, basically. Once we restructured their strength and conditioning work and, focused on quality over fatigue, training only 2 days a week, and that's typically how I train the majority of my fighters. Training 2 days a week, everything started to click. They moved better, they recovered faster, and they felt stronger and faster in general. So a lot of people might think it's crazy that training 2 days a week, but you get into the system, you'll realize like how effective it actually is. Just ask the fighters that train. So I want to leave you with this. Ask yourself this question: is my training making me a better fighter or just a stronger lifter? The second question to ask yourself is: do I leave sessions with more capacity and resilience or just more soreness? If your strength and conditioning is pulling from your skill work, you don't need to quit it altogether. You need a better plan. So the final thought is, let's build training that gives more than it takes. As always, I appreciate you being here. And, if you found this helpful, share it with a training partner or a coach that may need to hear this, or, someone who you see pretty much running their head into the wall with a whole bunch of strength and conditioning, and they're not getting anywhere. They may need to hear this episode here. All right. But thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next one.